people walking in front of the camera, having their pants fall down. I don't know. So yeah, well, I'm Tom Trimbath, and I'll kind of do my own intro in a little different way. I'm a real estate broker. I have to disclose that. It's almost like the state requires you to do it like you're a vendor of some sort, but I'm a real estate broker. And I come at real estate brokering from a slightly different bit. I used to be a rocket scientist at Boeing. So I used to deal with data an awful lot. And I'm much more comfortable with data. So when I started doing real estate, I realized I heard an awful lot of anecdotes. I heard a lot of stories about what was going on. But when I finally found the data, it was interesting because the anecdotes were true. The anecdotes, they weren't making them up. But the data can show something different than what the anecdotes do. So what I started doing was just every few months, for my own edification, I would just kind of look at the market. No judgment or anything like that. Just what's the numbers telling you? So that's what I'm going to be showing. If it looks like it's very geeky, it's because I'm a very geeky kind of guy. At the same time, the anecdotes are really good stories. So you may hear some of that as well. I'm also going to point out, pardon me, the first 2 minutes are always the nervous part. After that's all fun. But I'm a real estate broker. There are hundreds of real estate brokers on this island. I'm not saying I'm the best real estate broker. I know I'm not the best real estate because there is no best. It comes down to who you can work with and who can successfully help you with any transaction you're dealing with or just getting advice from. There's some folks around here who you show them a plot of land and they'll go back and not only tell you the human history, but they'll also go back to the geological history and tell you why that plot of land perks well or doesn't perk based on which way the glaciers were going and which way they were draining. There are folks around here that know the history of where the logging camps were, where the railroad was. If you didn't know we had a railroad, we had a railroad. And they can find the sites where they'll explain these long, straight, flat lines across your property sometimes. So everybody's got their own take on things. Mine happens to be more on the geek side, which is handy for talking to other rocket scientists. Now, I'll also say I was a rocket scientist for enough years to appreciate the folks who are rocket scientists for many decades. And the same thing comes for real estate. I'm a real estate agent of enough years to appreciate the folks who have been doing it for decades. So with that, we'll start talking about the stuff you actually care about. Weird years for Whidbey real estate. Yes, it has been weird. And it's been weird for years. This is nothing new, but of course it's always different. The word is out that there's a slowing going on. And that was the kind of the story I wanted to go find out about this time around. But I talked about not just the real estate, not just the slowing, but also the affordability of the island and other trends that are happening now, because they all kind of play in together. Houses don't exist on their own. At one level, the entire talk could be this one chart. That's what prices are doing. I'm not sure if you can see where this pointer is pointing, but if you're looking for a slowing, I could. Mm-hmm. There's a slowing. Oh, yeah. But the world isn't this simple. This is for the entire island. This is for every single type of property on the island: condominiums, farms, ranches, manufactured homes, waterfront properties, things like that. When you hear things are slowing, or in this case, housing is up or housing is down, I found it's really interesting to listen to the news source. If they might be talking about the number of homes that are being built, not the number that are being sold. And the number that's being built is really important to a contractor because they're building homes. The county cares about how many houses are being built because they're trying to find housing for people. Or it's the number of houses that are on the market, which matters if you're trying to sell your house. Are you overwhelmed? Or do you have a lot of competition or not? It also matters for the brokers. The brokers are really curious about the numbers sold because most brokers don't get paid unless the house sells. But there's just 3 examples right there where housing is up or housing is down can mean 3 different things. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about median list price rather than average. Average is you add everything up, you divide it through by the number of houses, and you get an average. Median is simpler than that. It is if there's 51 houses, then the 26th house is in the middle. and 25 houses are cheaper, and 25 houses are more expensive. It's a simpler way of doing things, but it also is less likely to get swung around by some $10 million property coming on the market. And then the other thing is it happening over the last decade, the last year, quarter, week, day, or hour? And that really comes to play because some interesting things have happened in the last week and a half. What I'm going to be showing is the data month by month. So the way the real estate industry hands us the data, they wait until the end of the month, and the next day, first day of the month, they give us the data, which is why these talks are always done in the first week of a month, because I got to get the data, I got to prepare it, but I don't want it to be stale by the end of the month. And then is it something that's just happening?
Tom, who's they that give you the data?
The Northwest Multiple Listing Service compiles all the data from the counties and things like that, with title and escrow and whatnot. So what I'm going to be reporting on are the things they've reported on as actual sales. So this isn't what somebody's selling it for, it's what it's sold for. And the thing I like about that is it's not somebody's guess of what the price is. It's what a buyer and a seller decided that house is going to go for that price. Whether somebody got a really good deal or a bad deal, I don't know. The other thing is a lot of this stuff I hear about can be happening at the country level, state level, but when you get down to it, what's happening on your own street. Speaking of your own street, this is my house. I'll give you an example. We're going to be talking about data for the entire area, but a lot of folks go and they look at what happens with Zillow or Redfin as far as what their house is worth, which is fascinating. It's a handy thing you couldn't have done 20 years ago. But here are 4 different analyses of my house. My house is 868 square feet, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, got a nice view, kind of substructed, not too bad, down in Sandy Hook. When I started giving these talks back in 2019, actually 2018, it was about 350. And those 4 algorithms were pretty close. Since then, they've had a rough time agreeing on anything. Right now, the difference between the one industry one, which is hard for anyone else to see, and another industry one, which is getting close to what Zillow says, is $120,000. So if you're talking to somebody what your house is worth, don't be surprised if they don't all come up with the same number, because these are unemotional algorithms without agenda, and they don't agree. Yet they're all still pulling from the same pot of data. So you can imagine that if I was selling my house, I'd really like that one. But as far as slowing goes, on a personal, individual level, Zillow, the blue one, is saying it's slowing. Redfin is saying it's kind of flat. The other industry one is saying it's going up still, and the other industry one hasn't done a thing in months. So I actually don't know what my house is worth. I'd have to put it on the market to find that. If that happens, any realtors in the office, in the room, will be the first to know. So let me get back to that original chart. Again, the rest of this presentation is going to be about entire markets in general. There's going to be a red line on these things, and that's not exactly where COVID started. It's the beginning of 2020. But I just that's when a lot of things started happening. 2018, 2019, there was a plateau. I remember the conversations we had in the office at that point, because the conversations were, oh my God, we hit a bubble, it just bursted, it's gone flat, it's going to go back down. Mm-hmm. It did. So right now, when folks are talking about, oh my God, we hit a bubble, we're having a slowdown, I don't know. I've heard arguments for both sides, and I'll show you what I see in the data as we go through it. But that is, to me, a fairly dramatic chart because it shows how much things have changed in the last 2.5 years. That's weird. I'm talking about weirdness. That's weird. The amount of variation we've seen in those few years is far greater than the amount of variation we saw over the last decade. So if you've got an opinion, or if somebody's giving you an opinion based on where things were 15 years ago, things have changed. They may still be right. So this data was when you average out over the last 12 months. This is the average of the median, which is a weird number to work with. Mm-hmm. If you go month by month, what happened in June, what happened in July, what happened in August, what happened in September, it bounces around an awful lot. And that's why most folks don't show this, is because it bounces around so much. This is where you can start to see things happen very quickly. And again, this is where I was expecting, when I seriously, when I was putting this presentation together, I heard so much about a slowdown. I was expecting to find that this was going to just pop down. No, it popped up about a year and a half ago, and at least as far as this data is going to go, it's not slowing down. It's still going up as of the end of August this year. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about Whidbey Island with a bit more detail to that. I'm going to break it up by areas, which is one reason I asked who all lives where, because real estate data is broken into South Whidbey, Central Whidbey, and North Whidbey, which is basically Greenbank and South, or Penn Cove and North, and Central, of course, is in between the two. So if you want to think of it as Oak Harbor, Coopville, and then the rest of the island. This is those three. So South Whidbey is the black line, Central Whidbey is the green line, and North Whidbey is the orange line. And you can actually see a slowdown. You look out here for Central Whidbey and North Whidbey, it's not going up as much as South Whidbey is. South Whidbey just barely looks like it noticed anything that was happening. It just keeps going. So you can argue that's a slowdown, but if I showed you that kind of a slowdown anywhere back in here, it just kind of blends in with nothing. It's not a strong trend as far as you look historically. It also might be precursor. It might be the very thing where we do have a slowdown. And this is where I'm not making judgment calls. This is why I like looking at the data, because I'm looking at the data, I'm going, I can still see it going either way. Are they going to catch back up to South Whidbey? Or is South Whidbey going to start reflecting what's happening on the rest of the island? I don't know. But that was for all properties. So that's for farms, condos, manufactured homes, regular homes. This is for residences, which is 90% of the market. So North Whidbey is not slowing down as much as it was. In houses, it's still going up. But there's still strong demand up there because they have so many people there for coming in from the Navy base. Central Whidbey is flat, but it's not gone down. And of course, South Whidbey just keeps crawling out the slope. So we've gone from under 500,000 to over 700 or 680,000 in just a couple of years. I am making more money in house appreciation than in any of my business ventures. And one could argue that I shouldn't be here. I should just be sitting on my deck reading a book or writing the next one and just letting the whole thing play itself out. Okay, so I thought, well, one of the things about price is if you sell a lot of big houses, the price is higher than it might be otherwise. A lot of small houses, same sort of thing, opposite. So I looked at the price per square foot. And South Whidbey still cranking up, North Whidbey still cranking up, and Central Whidbey's got this little dip. When looking at data, the smaller number of houses that are involved, the smaller number of people that are involved, there's more bouncing in the data. Seattle doesn't have curves that are as bouncy as this. They've got hundreds of thousands of people. It smooths itself out. Somebody in Coopville decides to move out, and all of a sudden the whole thing changes. Which also means you move to Coopville, and you have a big influence by being there. So there you go. This is a lot of jumble. This was just a mess. But this is how many days a house had to be on the market. The median number for a house sold. Up until when we were talking about that flat spot in the data back then, oh my God, we've gone from houses being on the market for 3 months to selling in a month. Oh my God. And now we're down to a week. Matter of fact, one of the jokes is if you listed a house on Thursday and you haven't sold it by Tuesday, what did you do wrong? Well, at least on the yearly data, there's no change. It's still down there where things are moving very quickly. Now, I'm hearing anecdotes, I'm seeing some data that suggests that it is starting to slow. But we're talking the difference between a few days and a few months. So this is still a very busy market. This is something I rarely show because it's the same data, but it's only shown out over the last 3 years. And you can just see the big swings. But here's finally the first sign I have of a slowdown. All three markets, the houses are taking longer to sell. Oh my God, they're taking 2 or 3 weeks to sell as compared to 100 days. Now, this might just be a precursor. You know, when you just go off a cliff, that first few seconds is not very fast. It's when you start to build up if it keeps going. I don't know, but this is where we are right now. So that's really the first real sign I've seen of a slowdown. But keep in mind, that's not showing up in the prices. If this continues, then you'll end up with more pressure to drop the prices, because if you want your house to sell quickly and it's taking longer, you drop the price. And I don't know if that's going to be the way that a lot of sellers feel. As much as I'm doing this by data, the market is still driven by emotion. It's all people. And if somebody feels freaked and they want to sell, they got to sell. Why? Because I think I got to sell. Rather than having a valid reason, that's a valid reason. But still, we can create our own trends. We can create our own future, actually, I guess, in some degree. The other thing that I noticed is, so this is the number of houses for sale. And those have both ticked up as well in North and South Whidbey. But again, one of the reasons prices kept going up is because there's been so low inventory. You look at where there used to be 300 houses in a month that are on the market for sale, and now you're talking like 30. 10 years ago, it was 10 times more. Supply and demand. Right.
Any differentiation there between primary residence and second homes for people? Or-
No, because it's not reported that way. But I'll get into that near the end. Unfortunately, you got to wait till near the end to get to that part.
Okay. Save the best for last.
It's one of the more fascinating parts to me because I live in one of the neighborhoods with a lot of vacant homes.
Vacant homes?
What the Census Bureau considers vacant homes.
People who don't live in them all the time but rent them?
Or
they are being-
they're not full-time
we don't know.
residences. Yeah. Yeah.
I watch the real estate for Windermere properties for sale quite often, every
Yeah.
day, as a matter of fact.
Uh-huh.
And it's the first time, for the longest time, that I've seen one contingent versus pending. So is that some type of a sign, maybe, I mean, in the market we had, you would accept a deal if it was contingent, right?
No, I was closing contingent sales in that, but you're right.
Yeah.
The most, in a very busy market, cash is king, or queen, as the case may be. And then you get into contingent and whether or not it's been financed, and then you get into some other variations on it. So yeah, but they've been happening all along. It had been, but I had a really long dry spell because all of my people who were making offers, and they're making offers. When there's 12 offers on a house, that means that one seller's happy, one broker's happy, one buyer's happy, their broker's happy, and you now have 11 teams of people that aren't. And they're going to move on to the next house and have possibly that same level of urgency, if not more. Now we are getting to, I think, contingent offers are a representation of the fact that it's not that's not so. I'm not showing how many offers per sale per house because I don't get that data. But it wouldn't surprise me at all to find out that the most multiples I've been involved with lately have been like 2 or 3 houses. So yeah, you're right.
I live in Coopville.
Yeah.
And
Congratulations.
I like it. I am seeing a lot more homes being bought, let's say from Seattle or the east side.
Yep.
And they're being changed to Airbnbs. Is that being experienced down here?
Yes.
Down here.
Yeah, that's the same question she was talking about. So
Is
I'm gonna get to
it?
that later on.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it's one. Well, I live in Sandy Hook, and it's I don't know the exact numbers for that neighborhood, but the difference between walking down that street at night in August as compared to walking down the street in February You know, it's a lot of dark windows in February. And the marina has a lot more empty slots. Again, getting into, so this is the months of supply of inventory. So in other words, not only how many houses are there, but how quickly are they selling. And it used to take, if nothing else would change, it would take over a year to clear out all the inventory. And now we're talking about a month. So it's still a very fast market. It might be the fact that we're at the top of that cusp and things are going to start growing, but at this point, I can't point to that data and really show you anything conclusive, regardless of what the news reports are saying. But if I broke it up, since I was looking at the yearly data, I'll look at the monthly data. Now we see that it had been down to under a half a month, and now it's kind of like at 2 months. So this is, all three of them are having the same thing happen. So that is the slowdown that I'm seeing. That's probably the biggest evidence of the slowdown I've seen. Not in prices, but it's in supply, time on market, and of course, eventually then that might show up in prices. The other part I found was this is how much the house went for over or under what it was listed at. And it used to be that you could count on 5% of a discount, and then of course after a while you really couldn't. And within the last few months, it was up to like 2% over, and that's the median. That's not the gross high and low. And then within the last the last month or two, that's come back down. This one is trickier on the median though. One other thing I did was I looked at I'm a geek. I went through and I did a bunch of analyses that I'm not allowed to share because they haven't been properly vetted for display. Won't get into all the details, but the regulatory environment is very strict on real estate because it's important stuff. But it used to be that the variance in how many went over or under was very tight. It was like a 5, maybe 10%, covered most of them. Within the last 2 years, it's been plus or minus 50. Prices have been listed, houses have been listed at prices that were guesses because it was really hard to know, are we at a bubble? Are we not at a bubble? Are we going to keep rising? We have so low inventory, where's it going to go? That I don't know that's come back down yet. It's a much more involved analysis. And since I can't include it in this, I didn't get around to it yet. To make a personal request, I might just be able to do something, but that's a fair amount of work. And again, this is now blowing that same thing up by the month instead of by the year. And sure enough, we're back under 100%, but not by a whole lot. Okay, so let's get more. Hang in there. We'll get to Coopville next. There might be some folks here from South Whidbey. I don't know. When I look at South Whidbey, Central Whidbey, and North Whidbey, I also tend to break it up so that it is waterfront and non-waterfront. And also what's the entire market. So the orange line is really what you're just seeing on the previous charts. The green line is all the houses that sold South Whidbey that weren't waterfront. And it's not much of a surprise. The waterfront's going to bring the prices up a bit. It's kind of noticeable, but not all that much. But then again, the waterfront prices, of course, are just, you talk about low inventory, we can't make more waterfront.
By waterfront, do you mean just on the water or view or in a view of the water?
I wish it was as scientific as that. There are fine distinctions between waterfront and beachfront. Like, do you own the logs or not? Or do you own the tidelands or just on to the high tide, low tide? Unfortunately, I think this data comes off of what box the realtor checked on the listing.
Oh.
And I haven't been able to dig in long enough to find out. But the trend is the thing, which is, if it seems like some places around here have just gotten very expensive, it's because they are. But a lot of the other ones are much more reasonable. It's not like every house is now $1 million house. For a while there, well, as a matter of fact, we typically have on South Whidbey, 40% of the houses tend to be $1 million homes. So the one way to look at that is 40% of $1 million homes. Right now, the median list price is around $800 to $850, which means if you take 72 homes, there's 36 of them that are under $1 million. Well, okay, people are not shopping from, oh, give me anything between 0 and $1 million. They're hunting for usually a range of about 200,000. The number of homes they're looking at is frequently on less than a dozen, if not only 3 or 4, if there's even any in their market. But that is all down here where things are at least well behaved. Waterfront just bounces. And I'll get to this in the end, hopefully, if I remind myself. But there's some trends that suggest that the other islands are going to start, the other waterfront parts of the other islands are becoming premium properties over and above what they have been. And that's on a nationwide scale. As far as homes for sale, there's hardly anything on waterfront. And that's one reason why those prices are going up so much. And you look over here, it's a few homes have very low supply, very high demand for those homes amongst the folks that can afford them, and those prices jump. But the majority of the homes are more moderate, and there's more inventory coming on the market. Whether it's houses being sold or houses being built, it's either way. Hey.
What would you call waterfront?
I get picky about it
Uh-huh.
because there's salt waterfront, lake waterfront, and I've actually seen one that was on Maxwell Creek that was listed as waterfront.
Would it be across the street too?
What I consider waterfront is if a big wave can hit the house or can hit the bluff underneath the house. But nobody else is measuring it that way. So we're getting more inventory, but it's still a long way from where it had been. Okay, go Phil. And the environs. But it's pretty much the same story. Take out the waterfront, and you have two things that are happening. All the properties and the rest of them are pretty much the same, but the waterfront takes off. And again, there's hardly any of those houses for sale. It's almost on zero. And it's starting the same thing where more houses are somehow coming on the market. And like I said, I'm not breaking that into whether it's new construction or something else that's been built. But you're not talking that Central Whidbey, 1.2 million for median price for waterfront. It's very similar to South Whidbey. And of course, so few houses sell that you almost look like a New York City skyline down there. North Whidbey, because North Whidbey is a different beast, at least as far as a market goes. You can skip right to the waterfront because it's actually got a similar story. It's really spiked up, and all three of these have really spiked up within the last few months. But all three of them have very low waterfront inventory. None of these is really showing a slowdown on a yearly basis. And at that level, it's still an aggressive growth, even for any of these, just take it on their own. And there's the inventory for North Whidbey. As far as waterfront goes, it's hardly anything. There's some gorgeous waterfront property. If you ever get a chance to drive up around, well, the northeast portion of Whidbey has just got some phenomenal properties. Actually, the whole island's got neat stuff to it. But a lot of folks, once they get north of Oak Harbor Center, they just go straight to Deception Pass and they totally ignore everything off to the east. There's a lot of island off to the east. Matter of fact, I'll do a plug. I'm in the midst of a 10-year photo project on the island where I go to a place 12 months out of the year and I take photos there. 8 of the books are back there right now. And one of them I just did was 12 months at Dugala Bay. So I got to spend a lot of time up around Dugala Bay, which I didn't even know existed until I started doing it. But there's some gorgeous properties out there, but there's hardly any for sale. Okay, so that was all houses. Let's talk land. Land is a mess. Land probably was much smoother data 50, 80 years ago. You could probably find a rectangular, flat, well-perked 5-acre lot. Thank you very much. But every year that goes by and a house gets built, there's another piece of land that's not available. So a lot of the land, talk about weird years, a lot of land is hard to buy right now because you have to go really study it. It's whether it's wetlands or a slope. Some of them are a beautiful 5 acre thing that's got water and it's got perk and everything's fine, but those prices are higher too. So it's an interesting market right now, but it is climbing. And instead of being down around 100,000 a few years ago, now they're up at 200,000. So it used to be that if you couldn't afford a house, you could buy some land, build on that land, and then build your house. Well, you can still buy the land. It's harder to get. It's harder to get good land. You still can, but it costs more. And then you got to find somebody who can build it. And those folks are in short supply. I just got a bid to fix a window on my house this morning. And he will only bid, he's one of the ones that would only bid, give me a partial bid if I did 5 windows at a time. Nobody will replace 1 window, they'll replace 5, which was better than all the other ones because all the other ones only do it if they could replace every window in the house. Because they're busy enough that they can make those kind of demands. As much as inventory might be up, it's still down in all 3 places, and it's all still much lower than it had been. It is supply and demand. If there's not enough, more people are here than there were 10 years ago. If we haven't built as many houses, not that I'm advocating building lots of houses, but without that, the supply goes up, the supply stays low, the demand stays high, and the prices go up. This is a really mess. I never showed this one before because it is such a mess, but this is how long it takes to sell land on the item. Now keep in mind, the number of land transactions is a 10th of the number of housing transactions, roughly, at least in terms of dollars. But I decided to show it because within the last 2 years, all of a sudden that just broken through into a new level. The amount of time a piece of land stays on the market, the median time, has dropped dramatically. There was one transaction I was involved in a year and a half ago where it was 4 lots. They're basically the rectangles, they're flat rectangles, and 3 of them sold within a weekend, which is just like you would expect for some houses in a busy market. But that was in a weekend, 3 pieces of land. Okay, so from that story, you can imagine that Whidbey is ridiculously expensive and you know can afford it, and we still don't know what's going on. So I look at other items. And for those of you who have seen this stuff before, that's why I've been concentrating on the end parts. But I compare that, get back there. This thing's too happy to move. I compare Whidbey Island to San Juan to Bainbridge to Vashon because those are 4 of the largest islands in the Puget Sound. They all have ferry access, and I can only look at 4 at a time because the software only lets me look at 4 at a time. Mm-hmm. The geek in me just gets upset with the software package, but it paints pretty pictures. As much as I was talking about Whidbey being expensive, it's the cheapest one of the lot, and not by a little bit. The median list price for Whidbey is somewhere around $500. This is for all properties. It was getting close to San Juan, but then San Juan just jumped up to $700. Vashon's over $800, and now Bainbridge is over $1.2 million. So we're at $500. If somebody from out of state, or anywhere actually, wants to move to an island in the Pacific Northwest, if they have limited funds, as in they don't have unlimited funds, as some buyers do, Whidbey Island is the most affordable of the lot. What that does is that increases the demand for Whidbey Island. And increased demand drives up prices. And as long as it doesn't drive those prices up above the other ones, then we're still more affordable than the other islands. Now, one of the consequences of this has been if you go back historically, and I used to run a museum, so you also get that in my resume. Go back about 100 years, and there were a lot of developers that were developing Whidbey and the islands as replacements or similar properties to the Hamptons, all those exclusive resorts or exclusive neighborhoods on the East Coast. there's a reason to make an argument for Whidbey now going up closer to what the San Juans have got. Partly because of that, and it's just they were just kind of ahead of themselves. But that was one of the justifications for this the Seven Pass Bridge. But also because there's hardly anything to buy on San Juan Island. I wouldn't. I did a road trip last year about this time, and there were days up there where individual islands had nothing for sale. You had dozens of brokers, because I was, of course, talking to the brokers. It was a business trip, and they had nothing to do because there was nothing to sell. They were not happy. They were glad that they could be selling. If they were selling something that's possibly going to be a $2 or $3 million property, but they didn't have anything to sell. Isn't it? So here's the inventory story. I'm talking about how much we've lost in inventory over that amount of time, but then look at where they are now. They're in a few houses, maybe a dozen or so houses on their islands. So not only is it expensive to be in these other islands, there's very little to buy on these other islands. That again argues for folks who want to be on an island in the Pacific Northwest. Could be more interested in living. Yeah.
Seems to me that would correlate pretty closely to the age of the owner.
And we're going to get to that.
Are you? Okay. So there'll be a lot more coming on as us old folks
Because I'm old.
kick off.
I just had to change my profile photo on Amazon.com because that hair had color.
Yeah.
So not only are these other islands not having much inventory, they're also having little growth in inventory. Whereas Whidbey's actually got a little bit of extra growth. And that extra growth is, again, that's going to keep our prices lower relative to these guys. But it also means that there's that much more reason for somebody to buy here because there's more for them to pick from. I don't know. That's just one argument I could see, though, for Whidbey becoming more like San Juan. Or at least parts of Whidbey becoming more like San Juan. That makes sense? Okay. Nobody said, so we'll go then. Okay, that's islands and islands. I like islands. I moved to an island. I used to live over in Seattle. Don't want to move back. Sorry, YouTube. So I compare against some of the neighboring cities. I compared Whidbey to Bellingham, Everett, and Seattle, just because they're all kind of along the water. And Everett, for instance, Bellevue is an interesting comparison, but it's landlocked. And again, Whidbey's the cheapest. Bellingham and Everett are very close together. They weren't for a while, but they're back to being very close in value and trends. But Seattle is still climbing on a yearly basis. And again, we're at about 500,000 for a median list price, and they're at 800,000. So somebody sells in Seattle, they can move to Whidbey with either a really large down payment or zero down payment, or book a worldwide cruise for the next decade. And I don't blame them for trying that either. But if I expand that, instead of looking yearly, I look annually, not monthly that is, all three of those cities have shown a downturn in the last couple months. All three of those are showing a slowdown. So King 5 News, Como, whoever, Q13, whatever. I don't watch the news often enough to know the call symbols. But yeah, these are all having downturns. Now, those downturns are after really large upturns. So that downturn still only takes you back a few months. It doesn't take you back to 2010. It takes you back to June. And then down here is Whidbey, which is still going up. So there are slowdowns going on, but not necessarily here to the same extent that they're going on anywhere else. And that's one reason why I like to look at the data rather than just relying on news reports or anecdotes, because things are slower. But they're getting back to normal here, whereas there may be more worrying for these other places, but even then, they're still talking about, this is only 2019. They got a long way to go before they get back to 2019 data. They might. I don't know. because I can't predict the future. But to me, that's the clearest sign I see of a general slowdown. Maybe Whidbey lags by a year or two. Maybe that's why we're not seeing it right now. Or maybe because they're not buying over there, they're buying over here. I don't know. The other part of the story is, surprisingly, in terms of how many houses are for sale, what a surprise. The big purple line is Seattle. That's where the majority of the houses are. And that slowdown I talked about at the very start happened just as Seattle loaded a lot of houses onto the inventory. A lot of houses went out on the market, new construction, and our prices flattened. And if you notice, the inventory has just gone down in Seattle. Okay, so that's an argument for the prices to keep going up here because there's not as much to buy in Seattle. But this is why I don't try to make a judgment on it. I watch the trends, I try to follow the trends, but I can't tell you how that's going to play out because you look at these, the other three places, we're hardly anything as far as this story goes. Is what happens in Seattle greatly affects what's happened everywhere else around this place, especially when it comes to inventory. Okay, so if you haven't noticed, I've been taking this out in bigger and bigger circles. This is not going to get any bigger than Pacific Rim.
No.
I mean, I could involve the Atlantic, but I'm not going to. This is a story that has been, well, I've been talking about this one ever since I found this great plot. I love this plot. But this is the population density in the area. Try to find Whidbey. I think, looking from this angle, I think that's Oak Harbor. What it comes down to is the Seattle metro area alone is 4.2 million people at least, because I know it's still been growing. Whidbey is about 80,000 people. Take a small percentage of 4.2 million and take a look at 200 houses we have for sale here, and you realize that if 200 people out of 4.2 million decided to buy on Whidbey, our whole market just went poof. Now that's not happening, but there's still that influence. And that's just the 4.2 around Seattle. That's not counting Vancouver. And Vancouver is one of the strangest markets in the world right now. I'm going to get into that one here a little bit. But this gets into that demand thing. How many folks want to move to Whidbey? Worldwide, I mean, I'm getting folks contacting me from the Southwest, Texas, the East Coast. More from Southwest than Texas. Politics has a thing to do with wildfires have a thing to do with, no surprise. But that's how much we're overshadowed by what's around us. Now, here's a term I came up with that was very early in the pandemic. And this graphic is from an EPA study that shows the population density. I don't have the animation for it, but that study showed that they're expecting population densities along the I-5 corridor to be similar to what's in downtown Seattle, almost all the way up to the mountains, but not on the islands. The islands are restricted in growth by natural resource limits. We've only got so much water, we've only got so much land, we've only got so many places we can handle sewage. Seattle can just do industrial scale things. The other thing I liked about it was the fact that folks are talking about six feet away, social distancing and whatnot. And take a look at some of the houses around here. They got distancing. Mm-hmm. And that's actually starting to become a thing where folks are going, I don't want to be in a condo where I'm sharing the elevator, the laundromat, the stairway, and everything else. I want to have an 8,000 square foot lot is enormous to them. And for good reason. You can finally have a garden. You can finally have a place where the kids go outside and play without having to worry about masks and things like that to the same extent. Well, when you compare all those locations, it's hard to compare the affordability of all of them because you get into political structures, tax structures, currency rates, and things like that. A few years ago, I found this study, and I'm hoping to find an update to it. But what it comes down to is, as far as major cities around the Pacific Ocean, Seattle is one of the most affordable. As ridiculous as that sounds, Seattle is one of the most affordable. Hong Kong, Vancouver, a lot of stuff, East Asia. So businesses that are trying to find places to relocate for their business or for their employees are finding the Pacific Northwest is attractive. So Seattle is cheaper than most of the rest of the Pacific Rim. The islands are cheaper than Seattle, and we're one of the cheapest islands. As unaffordable as Whidbey seems, we're one of the most affordable places around from that perspective, which is just a mind blow for me. Okay, so just to speed this along, because I've probably been talking too long, because I usually do. People and money. I'd like to thank the Economic Development Council. Yeah, I think that's it. They just produced the Island County Demographics Report updated in July. So this is even more up to date than the last time I gave this talk back in, earlier this year. What it comes down to is, without much of a surprise, North Whidbey residents tend to make less than the rest of the area. Not much of a surprise. I mean, the Navy's a good employer and you get great benefits, but the cash isn't always there. The median home value is not the list price, it's not the sales price, it's kind of more like what the assessors assess a house at, as I understand it. But what it comes down to again is, okay, so the prices are lower, or the values are lower in North Whidbey, and of course are 20%, 30% higher on South Whidbey, which is still more expensive than the rest of the U.S. and the outside of Oak Harbor, the rest of the island is more expensive than what's in the rest of the state. So take these two, take the home value and divide through by the income, and you get a kind of a balance as to how things settle out. What it comes down to is this value over here is 5.17 versus 5.72. What that really says is that the houses are much more out of line with income on the south end than they are on the north end. In 2011 to 2015 study, it was more like 4.595 for the entire island. So these are all more unaffordable than they were less than a decade ago. And the number that is considered to be affordable is 3. So instead of 3, it had gone up to 4.95, and that was worrying. And now we're rising above that as well. I'm glad to see wages are increasing, but if wages go up 5 to 10% and a house goes up 15 to 20%, it's less affordable than it was before. It's as simple as that. I mean, I'm on some committees and things like that help with affordability on the island, or at least try to understand it. But if the money coming in doesn't increase faster than the assets go up, it doesn't matter what you do with the housing, unless you somehow start taking the money that's going to the asset growth and you're turning it into other assets for other people. But now you get into tax structures and policies, and I'm going to leave that to somebody else's talk. Here's the one somebody was talking about. And this is one I still find fascinating. So we just talked about the price of the houses, the value of the houses, income, and things like that. The Census Bureau has a definition for vacant houses. Now, it's easy to just kind of arm wave it and say it's vacation houses or houses that aren't occupied all the time. But it also includes houses that for some reason somebody just died and the place doesn't have an occupant. It's a major renovation, somebody's not living in it. And the norm in the country is about 9%. But about 9% of the houses at any one time are considered vacation houses or things like that. Coopville, it's about a quarter are empty. South Whidbey's over a third. Less than 8 years ago, it was at 27%.
But is that taking into consideration the people that are the snowbirds that are going to wherever they go? Is that being thrown in there? Because Southwood, yeah.
I believe so. I believe that's what that is. I think that covers. Well, it's whatever the Census Bureau can track, which is largely responses. And whether or not it's a VRBO, an Airbnb, something you're renting out to somebody, or for instance, there's a fair number of houses. I can't remember if I got a chart for this. Pardon me again. There is a international trend called ghost houses. Ghost houses are houses that people are buying and leaving empty. They're just doing it totally as an investment. If my house is going up 15% a year,
More than the bank.
more than the stock market, and I still have a house. Now, if I was to put somebody in that house, they might damage something. So there's entire neighborhoods, especially in London, where there's entire blocks that are almost exclusively empty because folks just bought them for the asset growth. That is a real problem. Vancouver's got that problem. I think I do have a chart that shows these other ones. Is that the next one? Nope. It may have gotten cut out. It's gotten to the point that there are major municipalities are trying to figure out how to counter this. And we're starting to see it here, but I haven't seen any action on it. But they're doing things like, if you don't rent out your house, we're going to charge you rent on your house. So like the city of Paris was talking about, a major fraction of whatever your rent would be is you're not making that money, we're going to give that money to somebody else. We're going to charge you to have a vacant house. And they can then use that for housing. They're trying to find it, but nobody's actually found a way that really works. This number, the 38%, is more than a third, but some of those neighborhoods I was talking about on the East Coast are more like 60%. So we're not bad. Again, we have 62% occupied, and that's of course because we still have commuters, we still have some industry, we still have folks that work from home, things like that. It's not just a retirement community. This is just a growth projection. It was put together just before pandemic. I'd love to see an update on it. So if anybody finds one, please tell me. Take a business card, which I forgot to leave out, but come get me and I'll give you a business card. That is not generator. That is a number that's a word that got cut off by a graphic. Sorry about that. The other thing it shows on the island, somebody else was asking about this beforehand. The median age in Oak Harbor is 31. Median age in Troopville and down here is over 57. There's basically a generation difference. To do real estate in Oak Harbor, it really behooves you to know VA loans. And there's going to be folks that are putting minimum down, and they just got their first job, and great, and they's really enthused. If you remember buying your first house, the south end of the island, it can be cash, and it doesn't have to be as heavily financed. Or if it's financing, the financing is far easier because they know the banker, they own the bank, that kind of thing. And seriously, I know at least 2 cases where that was the case. So that changes. That does say that this is not all the same island. As much as some of these trends are very similar and whatnot, this is also why I don't group it all into one, because we really are different. We don't have a bunch of Navy personnel. They have to be within an hour of the Navy base. We're not reliably, at least. So the only constant is change. And here's some scenarios that have just kind of come up that totally can throw all these things into confusion. COVID, of course, did that. The military's got some changes going on, so is tourism. I'm going to go through these. Regional economy and nature. The fact that we're having too few workers is impacting the economy. Supply chains didn't help some of them. I know that. It took me 6 months to get my bicycle fixed because they couldn't come up with shift levers, which is really hard to ride a 27-speed bike without shift levers. Of course, we're a retirement community, and that's still happening. Well, especially as a lot of folks are going through the Great Resignation, going, I'm out of here, I'm done. And I suspect there are fewer folks that want to tour on a cruise ship as compared to before. There's still folks that want to do it because I watch the cruise ships go by every night. But we're getting folks that are trying to get away from confined spaces like that. And of course, it's the rural distancing thing. It can be really relaxing to not have anybody around you and don't have to listen for the cough. The military was having enough issues when it's in its own when the Navy decided to shift thousands of personnel here. Was evidently, as I've been able to find, they never checked to see if they could actually fit, if there was actually enough room for them. Which is why Oak Harbor has been such a problem in terms of trying to find housing, because they have restrictions to their growth as well. And of course, there's always politics that change budgets every year and things like that. But if you've been hearing about the Russians invading the Ukraine and what's been happening with all the drones, the Navy is now considering changing their tactics to use more drones than to use more piloted vehicles, which gets into the whole reason for the practice field up out of Coopville and for the Navy base out of Oak Harbor. I doubt that they're going to totally go away. But I'm an aerospace engineer. The first airplane I worked on was an F-18. It was not even called an F-18. I'm old. It was not even called an F-18. I can tell you that's an old airframe because I was working on it before it was an official thing. The idea that a drone could do the same thing is hard for some folks to grasp until you watch what's been happening in the Ukraine. And watch, I found some news items that are coming out of Navy planning where they're trying to consider scaling back training and switching their platforms. Because if you lose a pilot, and you lose a piloted airplane costs tens of millions, a pilot is worth millions, and you lose a drone and it might be 3 million. I don't know, but one thing I keep in mind as far as, well, I'm from Pittsburgh, from the era when they were just starting to clean it up and all the steel factories were still there. Within 30 years, they knocked down almost all the steel factories. Something my parents never could have imagined. It drove some of my uncles who worked in them into some mental health issues because their paradigm was literally picked up, carted away, and melted and thrown out. And so was their job. So I keep in mind whenever I'm up at Fort Casey or Fort Evie, which used to be military installations, which are now parks, that there's an airfield in Oak Harbor that's got a west view, has access to the Pacific, has a very nice marina, and has an airport that can take 737s. And if the Navy moved out, would tourism move in? Nah, it'll never happen.
You'd still be living near an airport.
Yeah, but the F-18 versus the 737, hi, I'm an aerospace engineer. The acoustic contour for the F-18 in the practice thing, we have maps for it because it intrudes on, overlaps with where people live. The same level of noise at a paying field doesn't make it past the fence line because they're a different type of jet. They're not trying to go straight up. They have one straight down. That's interesting. Tourism, of course, some of you probably understand what the tourism industry in Whidbey is like right now. I know I see a lot more Maseratis. I see a lot more exotic cars where I go, I know that ain't normal. There's a story I can tell about somebody with a Maserati and me in my white pickup truck, but there was a culture clash there. They couldn't imagine why I wouldn't want to park my pickup truck beside their Maserati. So, well, whether I do anything or not, if your Maserati gets dinged and I get blamed, fixing your bumper costs as much as my truck. I'm going to park somewhere else. And he couldn't understand that. And I understand, because, why would you? You don't buy the car. You don't buy a Maserati thinking about a pickup truck. Why would you do that? Yeah, you can laugh. That's okay. And as the border restrictions improve, that means there's more likely for folks to go north and south. We're still a very attractive place to go. And like I said, not everybody wants to go fly somewhere else, another country, or get on a boat. We're still largely driven by what happens in the region. I believe it's still 60% of the full-time jobs on the South Whidbey are commuters. That was before work from home and before telecommuting. And Boeing keeps changing. Who knows what Boeing's going to do next? Amazon, of course, is growing as ever. And whether they're here or not, shipping has always been a big issue for us. Trade has always been a big issue for us. And the importance of that has been highlighted in the last couple of years. I mean, heck, did we ever get to 4 container ships in Holmes Harbor? I know we got to 3. But still, we literally had that in our backyard. And of course, I'm now starting to see more folks who are interested in living here because there's high-speed internet and they don't have to drive into work. Because why not move here, have your kids raised someplace that was quieter, and don't have to worry about Seattle. But if you need it, it's right there. And then if you need to fly out, you got Painfield, SeaTac, and Bellingham. I mean, it's sweet. The issue is one of the issues is the prices are high here, and that isn't necessarily sustainable unless the wages keep up with them. And I don't see any sign of that happening. Businesses are having a hard time getting folks to live here because they can't afford to live here, which makes it harder for the businesses. And we're also going through a generational change because the demographic, keep in mind, the median is over 50. That's not the high and low. How many businesses have you seen in Kent's Corner, downtown Langley, and Bayview that within the last 2 or 3 years, whether it's from COVID or not having enough employees or not having enough stock, have had to close? With prices as high as they are, it's no longer as easy for somebody to say, I've got this great idea. I'm going to open a business. Because if you want to open up a business in the doghouse, look how much hassle it's been to open a business in the doghouse. And then there's Mike's place across the street. UBCC's now, as I understand it, is closed.
Yeah.
You know, how many other businesses in downtown Langley are in that situation? Now there's some that have opened up, which is great. But it's no longer Lynn's Drug. It's no longer a greeting card store. It's some really nice furniture, some really nice clothes. And one thing, most of the clothes are for women, so I'm not buying those. And as far as the really nice furniture, I'm a minimalist. I really don't. Somebody toured my house one time when we were up for sale. They thought I'd already moved out because I had so little. And it's like, hi, this is fancy for me. They're long pants, not shorts. So the unsustainability to me is already an issue. It's frequently talked about as if it is something we have to make sure that we never get to be unsustainable. I think we're already here, and it's not that a business goes out because I'm unsustainable. It's I decided to do something else, or I couldn't get enough employees, and they don't come in with that label. They just incrementally add and add and add, and at some point you go, this is systemic. This isn't what just happened with the doghouse. This isn't just happened with one other thing. That's my opinion. That's not a fact because there's no data for it. And then, of course, got your earthquake preparedness kit and tsunamis. And we had a quake this morning. It was very small, very small. Landslides. There's a slide that just happened in downtown Langley over the summer. And we're coming up on November, storm and windy season. And the saltwater intrusion is happening more now as people pump out the aquifer to take care of the houses. And, that is, once the salt water comes in, it's hard to get it back out again. So how many houses are at threat of that? There's a map for it on, as a matter of fact, there's maps for a lot of these things. I've got a website called aboutwhidbey.com. It's a blog. So once a week I post something which hopefully is interesting. This week will be this, of course. But a lot of times I'll just kind of cruise through the county websites, and there's some fascinating data out there about where the fault lines are, where the wetlands are, and also what slopes are unstable, and also where the saltwater is coming in. There's a lot of this stuff is already out there. So we're getting close to the end. Hang in there. This is just anecdotal because we don't know who buys a house. We don't know why they bought the house. But I have been talking to folks who have bought here because of wildfires. They were in the Paradise Fire. One couple in particular. I'm not sure if you're here tonight. But they were 1 o'clock in the morning. She was asleep. He happened to be up practicing his cello, which just seemed so stereotypical. And he looked out the window and he could see a glow at the end of the street. 10 minutes later, they were out of the house and the house was gone. They now have PTSD when it gets smoky outside. And they feel comfortable when it rains. So by coming here, they're not necessarily getting rid of the smoke, but it's easier to think it's more remote. But they're looking forward to the rain. I talk to people who politically, on either side, want to move the Pacific Northwest. One, because they like the legislation here, others because of some ethnic issues. And I'm sure there's everything in between. But people are coming here because they don't like where they are. And I don't know how much that's going to be, but I do know that as the current population moves, there's always going to be some portion of it that's moving. It's not like if you've been here for 50 years and somebody comes in and buys your house, you don't train them on how to have the same attitudes you got over the last 50 years. They're bringing in their own attitudes. They're bringing in their Maserati. Maserati's a fine car. I don't want to have to pay for a Maserati. Really, I don't. I like a Jeep. So they're getting away from some of these things. And that also means that the culture is going to change. And that's going to change the demographics, it's going to change the economics, it's going to change everything else. I don't know if it's going to be a big change or not, but I have a hard time believing that's not going to be noticeable. And it's just simply because change is constant. That is what happens. Some of the things that are happening, matter of fact, I think it was Langley that just had a talk on rain catchment. So for water issues. Sanitation, there's more conversations now about composting toilets and things like that. And of course, Big Gig, we'll talk to George Henney about Big Gig and just prepared to stand there and listen to a really great sales pitch. So there are some things that are actually changing it on the technology side. And what I find interesting is there are places that have, well, this is fairly impressive as far as it goes, but of course there's always faster. In sanitation and water, there are other places that have already solved these issues. They have, for whatever reason, counties that are happy to let you use catchment and not be draining the aquifer, are happy that you're not tapping into their sewer system or something like that because you found another solution. I talked to some of the brokers in some of the islands, and I did an 1,100-mile road trip around Washington State so I could compare it to other parts. I won't say it was altruistic. I was looking for a possible place for me to live too. But you go to these other counties and you find all these other solutions to problems that we think we have problems with. And they go, no, you just do this, you do that. There's still a stigma against manufactured homes. You go east of the mountains, and the majority of the houses are manufactured homes because they're fine, they work. If you've been in a 3,000 square foot custom built home, it can seem like it is not as nice because maybe it isn't. But if you're 20 or 30 years old and you've been in apartments with people around all sides of you, and now you're talking about having something on a half an acre or an acre, and it's your own house, this is really nice. And they can be really nice, especially when you get into modular and the other types of manufacturers. So this is some of the things I think that's going to make it easier to live here. Not necessarily cheaper, but easier. Hey, believe it or not, there's actually a summary. And I'll summarize the summary. One of the things that's happening is people don't want to sell until they can find someplace they want to move. If everybody else wants to move here, where do we want to move? The only folks I know that have shown a particular trend for moving have been artists, which I find is interesting and ironic considering that Langley just got designated as a creative district. That the artists are moving because they can't afford to live in the creative district. So I'm still I'm putting this out almost as a public plea, but I've been told that there's a number of artists that have moved to Twist over on the Methow because it's got a tourist community, an artist community coming up, and it's down the street from, relatively down the street, from a tourist community. So there's places for studios and also revenue source. And I know that there already was one that was based on artists from Seattle. I think the town is down by Rainier. It's called Teton. And it was one of these rural towns that was dwindling in a population. And a bunch of artists just went down there and just started buying up some buildings and putting in their studios. And they collaborated and they found resistance. But then after about 6 months, the folks that lived there went, hey, these guys are paying taxes. This is handy. These folks can work. This is handy. So I wouldn't be surprised to find that. I'd like to hear about whether or not there's any data on folks that have actually done this. As I understand, there have been some folks who would be moved, but I haven't been able to track them down. And with that, that's the end. Thank you, Freeland Library. Where's she at? There we go. Hi, thank you, Tracy. And the entire system as well. With that, I will shut up and drink something while somebody decides to come up with a question.
Really quick, where's that data to be found on the saltwater incursion?
The county website, and they have a GIS series of maps. If you can't find it, I'll give you a business card, send it to me, and it's a simple enough link.
Okay.
Or you can call the county and say, hey, I understand you got some saltwater intrusion maps. And because it's Island County, you also get Camino at the same time. What I can recall offhand, North Whidbey has more of an issue than South Whidbey, but it also has more people. But it also has an alternate sources of water. Anything else? Well, I'm fine. I've got my,
Anything on wells, digging new wells?
I don't know about,
Any restrictions on the horizon?
I haven't heard of any changes. But that has always been an individual thing where each one you have to just go around and check to find out if that particular neighborhood has used up its allotment or not. That is part of the same. There's usually, when you buy a house, you're usually recommended to get an inspection. When you're buying a piece of land, you're usually recommended to get a feasibility study. And that's usually part of the feasibility study.
Right. What's the typical height or elevation that you would consider safe to buy a house above tsunami purposes?
Oh, you are such a good leader. For those of you who aren't aware, Whidbey gets tsunamis from three different sources. There's the big quake off on the Cascadia rupture zone. And there are some fascinating inundation maps you can watch, but there's some data on that. USGS has it. There's a South Whidbey fault. There's actually a fault line that goes across almost every part of the island. But the South Whidbey fault has a tendency to throw tsunamis to Seattle. The Seattle fault has tsunamis thrown at Whidbey. I live on Cultus Bay, by Cultus Bay. Cultus Bay is a funnel pointed at Seattle. So one of the leading geologists went to Cultus Bay and documented where the tsunami, how far in the tsunamis have gone and how deep they've gone. So I've got that report. It's a very geeky thing, but what I purposely did was I made sure that when I bought above 60 foot above the sea level. The other thing we get though are this could be the doom and gloom dire stuff, but look at the south end of Camino, and you'll see a bluff. And look over at Hat Island. There was a tsunami within recorded European history, of that bluff taking on a village on Hat Island. Because landslides can generate tsunamis. And they can actually generate bigger tsunamis than the earthquakes can. They just tend to be more local. I bought it 110 feet off the water, above sea level. The one on Cultus Bay, I don't think got much more than a few meters. But it would have put 40 centimeters of sand into some of the houses that are there, and 40 centimeters of sand is not going to be something you just kind of go, oh, that's not a problem. There's that issue. So the north end is more susceptible to tsunamis from Great Cascadia earthquake. Cultus Bay is more vulnerable to the Seattle fault. And as far as landslides go, I think that's kind of a crapshoot. Did that answer your question?
So what's the number?
I made sure I was above 60 feet. But that's because I was just kind of grabbing a number. I know I wasn't going to go below 10. But that's my personal thing. Oh, by the way, before I do that, as far as ocean rise goes, I'd love to have somebody corroborate this, but the last time I found a study on it, because we were under the glaciers, because there's 3,000 foot of ice here. Ice is heavy. As the glaciers left, the ground's come up. The ground has been coming up almost as fast as the sea levels are coming up. So we're okay? But that's why I worry more about earthquakes and landslides and things like that than I do about global warming for this area. I really don't want to live in Florida. But I just moved out of there and he's land planning. Yes.
So as far as the waterfront stuff and high bluff stuff,
Yeah.
are they insurable? I mean,
I would ask your insurance agent.
I know. Is that
I-
gonna limit
And I
the
actually
price
don't,
as well?
as I understand it, everything is insurable if you have enough money. That's why Lloyd's of London exists. But it can be ridiculous. I know that prior to the Nisqually quake, it was possible to get earthquake insurance. And now it's still possible, but it's far more expensive because the insurance companies finally calculated out how much it would cost to pay out on all those policies in the Puget Sound area if a really big earthquake happened. And they realized they had to just make it ridiculously expensive because otherwise they'd be bankrupt. And it would impact the rest of the insurance industry in the United States.
Earthquake premiums really aren't that bad.
Really?
You can get under $1,000 for $300,000 home.
Talk to the man. Talk to the man.
Landslides depends on if you're in a repeat slide area. It'll be harder to get a DIC or landslide type policy. But earthquake, you can pretty much get anywhere on the island.
So people who are coming in from other places that maybe aren't as aware of that sort of a danger, are they, at some point they become aware and go, okay, never mind, I don't want to buy it like right on the water or right up the top of the water?
There's actually a form
Uh-huh.
that should, I won't use the word should, now we're going to get legalese. There's a form specifically for denoting the fact that geological hazards exist. I include it in every single one of my transactions. Not every broker does.
Mhm.
But, so they might be aware, but it's really hard not to be unless the only thing you do is watch reality shows, which are not reality, but that's the thing. By the way, thank you for that answer, because I didn't have to provide it.
So who's overall, like, is it the county, is it the little municipalities, who's in charge of housing creation? Like, I guess what I'm wondering, because I know there are developers that would happily turn the whole island into Manhattan if they could, you know? And like, obviously, it'd be a nice, like, oh, we can't afford housing, therefore let's just build 1,000 units and it'll lower the demand, right? So, like, who's in charge of those decisions?
When in doubt,
Where's the limitation?
When in doubt,
Who
always
has
ask.
the vision? I'm assuming it's pretty complex, but
you always go to, at least for the first hit, go to the county or go to the municipality. So for instance, Langley has its own planning bureau, county has its own planning bureau. And they may just say, no, go talk to so-and-so. But that's where I would start. I don't have the definitive answer, but that's where I would start.
Growth management.
thank you. What's that?
Growth management.
Growth management.
There you go. Hi, what's your name? What's your job? Open disclosure. What do you do?
next.
No, I'm Ryan Porter with Porter Whidbey Insurance.
Oh, okay, cool. There you go. Nicely done. Introduce yourself. I don't care. I don't even care if you're a broker trying to compete against me. I know how many transactions I'm gonna handle at a time. Right now, I'm just recovering from the last one. Anything else? Well, in that case, you can still come up and ask questions, but this is the opportunity for those who are too polite to leave while everybody else is talking to leave. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
The county tries to keep those long as growth management is a statewide level. But as the county, they have to have like your urban growth areas. So
Hosts
municipality.
and